And I think this is it's a privilege, it's an honor to have this panel here, and to have these people also attending the academic sessions, because some of them are really the key policymakers in our field. I will introduce you later, all of them. So I think it's great to be able to have this policy session, to get ideas, to provide feedback also to some of these people who are in international institutions, in governments, or who are really advising key policymakers around the world. So let me first introduce each of them, and then I will raise a few questions or some issues to each of them. I will give them 5 minutes to each, and then we'll interact a bit internally, and then we'll open we'll give the voice to the audience to participate. Okay, so let me start introducing Simon Black. First of all, he's an economist at the IMF's Fiscal Affairs Department, where he specializes in climate change mitigation. But he also was very active in policy, because he was part of the UK as climate UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office as climate economist, and he also served at the UK delegation in different COPs, if I'm right. So thanks, Simon, for being here. He also presented a paper yesterday, a very interesting paper on the stock take from the Paris Agreement results. Then we also have Lucas Bretschger. He's well known to most of you. He's a great academic. He was a keynote in our previous Atosha workshop. He's professor of economics at ETH Zurich and at the University of Zurich, and also he was past president of the IARE. Also, Lucas participated as member of the Swiss delegation in many COPs. I think this says a lot about Lucas, willing to intervene in this as an academic, willing to intervene in these events, and also in the delegation. And also it says a lot about Switzerland, taking academics into the delegation. We also have Soledad Núñez here. She comes from the Bank of Spain. She's an economist as us, and also a very well educated economist. She's PhD in economics from the University of Minnesota, and she was also in the government. She was in the private sector, and she is now having a big role in the Bank of Spain. She's member of the governing body, of the governing council of the Bank of Spain, and also she's dealing there with climate and with climate issues, and I think it's a great fit for this policy session to have her here. We have Zhang Xiliang here, very well known to many of you. He's a professor of management, science, and engineering, and director of the Institute of Energy at Tsinghua University, China. But you know, his influence has been and is huge, because he has been heading the expert group of national carbon market design in China since 2015. I think he's a key player at an international level, and it's great to have an academic with such knowledge and influence in policy making here. Thanks, Xiliang, for being here. We also have Anne Neumann, who was yesterday participating in another session. Apologies, Anne, because I have your beta in a different, in the other session, editor session. Yeah, she's professor at the Department of Industrial Economics and Technology at NTNU, Norway. And you know that she's a major editor in energy policy, and she's also on the editorial board of Economics of Energy and Environmental Policy. So, I mean, this journal is devoted to the topics we are dealing with here. And also, I think she participated very actively in some reports, recent reports on energy transition, and also she has quite a voice in some European countries as providing feedback to governments, etc. So Anne, thank you very much for being here. Also, with a different hat today as of tomorrow. It's great to have you here. And last but not least, as you will see, we have Beatriz Yordi. I'm very happy to have her here because she's a Galician like me, and we are in Galicia. She was invited in the previous workshop of Tosha, but she couldn't come, and it's great that she made it to this last workshop because she's a key person now at the European level, at the world level, I would say. She's director of climate markets and clean mobility at the European Commission. She has, therefore, a huge package and program of policies under her responsibility. And I'm sure she can provide very interesting messages for us, and perhaps she can receive also interesting messages from us. She was attending some previous session where some papers on aviation and the EU ETS, which is, of course, your responsibility, were presented, and other things on national policies, which are also of her interest. So thank you very much, Bea, for being here. And with that, I would say that we start. I will provide some topics. First of all, I will give the floor to Lucas, and I would ask him, his views on climate mitigation from a global perspective. You gave us a very nice keynote, somehow related to these issues in the last workshop. And what's your view on the global architecture and the expectations on the functioning of this global architecture? I'm sure that then Simon can complement on this.
Thank you, Xavier. Yeah, indeed, architecture. I mean, this made me think of once I did a research on sustainable construction, and then I thought, well, if you look at climate policy, this is neither very solid nor sustainable somehow. But I wouldn't be too pessimistic, because it's the view. When you say something negative of the global architecture, then of course it's the view of the theorist in me, which is used to have, well, as a theorist, you have a model, you have an optimal solution, you have a social planner, and then you calculate the optimal policy design. You go to the policymaker and say, now you have to implement this better tomorrow and not too late. And then you learn that this is not feasible. So on an international scale, this top-down approach was abandoned at the COP in Copenhagen, the first that I attended, which was a complete failure, and we had to give up there. And then, of course, as you heard already, I've been in policy as an advisor and also a member of the Swiss delegation. As a climate negotiator, I learned that this top-down has no chance, no way. The only way we can, and it's really hard to learning that the only feasible or the only option that we have is this pledge and review. And many of my colleagues still cannot believe that we're doing this, but it's the only realistic option we do have in an international context where you do not have a world government. So countries make pledges, and then there is a review, and we have to talk about both parts, but this is actually what we can do at the moment, and it's unsatisfactory. And of course we want to give as much as input as we can, but in the end, yeah, this is where we are. And now these pledges of the countries should be informed by economics, obviously. And this is also a problem. I mean, we have this very clever analysis of policy design. We have a ranking, but we have also seen that we are not really, we do not agree on everything, but we should try to give our best information. But we realize in public, in the national policies, which actually have the same problems as the international policy, that the costs are not really well calculated often. And the benefits often are not really realized. So, for example, health benefits, we try to stress this a lot. What kind of health benefits you would have if you use less carbon emissions, if you have less carbon emissions. So both sides are a bit difficult, and we have to give the best of our possibilities to inform national policies and these pledges. And well, this is kind of because the overall temperature target is already decided. I always have to explain also this to my colleagues who come up with new temperature targets. Yeah, it's okay to do this, but actually the policy agenda is set. Is about cost efficiency now. And now the other part that we have on the pledge and review is the review. And I must say, I'm a bit disappointed what happened this year, because I thought this would be now really a broad stock take and we really would look into the different cases. But again, this is not really liked by the different countries. They don't want to be named and shamed. So in the beginning, before Paris, in Lima, we had the idea that the independent agency, or maybe a university type of agency, would look at these different pledges and then make their comments and show where the gaps are, where the biggest gaps are, and which countries are on track. Maybe nobody's on track, but who is more on track, who is less? But also this was dismissed in Lima. 2014, this was abandoned. This was cancelled out of the text, like the carbon price was cancelled in Paris out of the text. So we really have sometimes a hard time to being heard. And now to conclude my first statement, some economists, some colleagues are a bit disappointed. They get a bit pessimistic and a bit, I don't know, they believe we will not be able to do this in the end. And I don't know whether this is really a good attitude, or if this is the real attitude, because I believe we actually could solve this. It is really so. Climate problem can be solved if we take all the measures that we have. It could be solved, but when we are doubters, maybe we think that as scientists we have to be skeptical all the way, and then we should show this skepticism all the way. But in the end, it is a question: where do we stand? Where do you stand? How you talk to your government? How you talk to your students? It may make an impact.
Thank you, Lucas. Perhaps, Simon, you want to complement also your view from the IMF. I mean, you are talking here as yourself, not as IMF kind of spokesman. But I would like to know your views on further on this, and also I had sent you some ideas on your view, given the work you are doing with Ian Parry and other people there on policies, different types of countries, like in many less developed countries. What's your view on the possibilities of abandoning fossil fuels in the next decades? I mean, are we on track at a global level? Is your advice being taken? You see a lot of trouble there. I mean, we do have trouble also in developed countries like the EU countries, etc. So I guess that this is a problem also in those type of economies.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that. And just to complement what Lucas was saying, I think in terms of the architecture, the UNFCCC, it's a little bit like if you were designing a building with 195 architects that all have very high egos, and they all have to agree, and every single one of them has a veto power. So on my way to my first ever COP back in sort of 2014, one of my bosses took me aside and said, "Look, Simon, before we get there, you're going to see what it's like. It's a mess. We all know this. Everybody dislikes it. Everyone knows it doesn't really work very well, but we need to get through this. It's a process." So that is the reality of COP, and it's very easy to get pessimistic about that, especially given we're into our 29th year, and emissions continue to rise and have risen substantially since the founding the UNFCCC, but what we have now is a framework. We do have an architecture that is bottom-up, that actually does work in terms of the politics, or is the best that we could get in terms of the politics in the run-up to the Paris Agreement. The question is this theory of pledge and review, is it working or not? And so that's what we tried to answer with the working paper that we took to the last COP, which had the title, Is the Paris Agreement Working?, which I presented to some of you yesterday. And our key takeaway from that is progress is being made. So the ambition in NDCs has risen somewhat from a tiny reduction versus BAU emissions of about 2% to about 11%. But we need to get to 43%, according to the countries themselves who have recognized the IPCC. So we need to increase ambition in this decade by 4x. And coming out of the global stocktake, I was also a little bit disappointed at what that yielded, because there was supposed to be a moment at the global stocktake where there would be some sort of plan and a response to it, but it seems like the can has been kicked a bit down the road, and countries are now focusing on the 2035 targets, which they have said need to be 1.5C aligned, but they're also required to revisit their 2030 targets. And so, without getting into too many details, if countries do not revisit their 2030 targets and significantly increase ambition of those targets, then we're going to be facing a cliff edge in global emissions sometime in the late 2030s or early 2040s, which may or may not be technically feasible. And then we have to think about, really extreme solutions like a huge amount of carbon dioxide removal and other things like that. So I think what I was expecting post-Paris, and we integrated this into the Paris Agreement when we were negotiating it, was an acceptance that it's very difficult for 195 countries to agree to increase their ambition because of all these tragedy of the commons issues. And so we hoped there would be a lot more climate clubs, high ambition clubs. Unfortunately, those haven't really emerged in as strong a way as we had hoped. We and others have proposed different versions of climate clubs. Ours was an international carbon price floor agreement between major emitting countries, covering over 2/3 of emissions, which would get us on track back to 2C. And we continue to advise countries, especially the big emitting governments, on how to do that, on how to increase ambition, how to get on track. But just a couple of very quick key takeaways on the process. It took 28 years to name the elephant in the room in the COP process, which is fossil fuels. So the word fossil fuel first appeared in the COP28 text in the context of transition away from fossil fuels in energy systems. And of course, coal was mentioned for the first time at COP26. I just came back from the Bonn Intersessional, which there's 2 usually per year between COPs, and that working process does not have a home. Countries are still arguing as to where that idea of fossil fuel transition should fit in the mitigation program, in the global stocktake program. It's not really clear, so that the progress on that is going to be very slow. Countries have also agreed to tripling renewables. There's only one country we think that is on track to actually achieve that, which would be China, and additionally doubling of energy efficiency. So there are some positives here, but it's all a bit of a mixed bag. Finally, just to very briefly talk about carbon pricing and fossil fuel subsidy reform, which we opine on quite a lot. So there's now about 70 schemes globally on carbon pricing. It covers about 23% of emissions, but the average prices are very low. So the global average carbon price is about $5 per ton. We need to increase that to about $90 per ton in the next 4 years. We can talk about how realistic that is. Additionally, the increase in the coverage from about 10% 10 years ago, the vast majority of that has come from emissions trading systems, which we prefer carbon taxes because you tend to cover more of the emissions, you tend to get more revenues that you can use for productive purposes and so on. But we've seen this real shift towards ETSs and away from carbon taxes, which is somewhat concerning for us. Finally, fossil fuel subsidies continue to persist globally. They rose to 1.5 trillion in terms of explicit subsidies in 2022. That's come down a lot, but still they're very, very high and persistent, and means we have negative carbon pricing for about 20% of global emissions, and that should have been sort of done away a very long time ago. So overall, slow progress. Paris Agreement is sort of working in terms of slowly increasing ambition, but we need to really accelerate the process, and I think we'll know by Belém, which is the end of the COP in November, the end of next year in Brazil, whether or not we're really going to be on track with this process or not, or if we need some sort of radical reformation of the international system.
Thanks, Simon. Bea, from this global perspective, how are we at the EU? And I mean, you are responsible for carbon markets, for transportation. Transportation is a key issue, as we saw during this workshop. Can we get the 2030 objectives in many countries? I mean, what's your view on these issues? And I would like to remind everybody that this is a closed session. We are academics, and we are inviting her as a key policy maker, and we are asking her opinions. So please keep this in this room. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Javier, but I'm afraid I will not have a lot of secrets. But very happy to be here. I mean, as Galician, as you said, and very proud, and also very happy because it's such a pleasure to see things that we are negotiating in Europe. I'm a European negotiator with Council and Parliament, to hear about cost pass-through, to hear about elasticities, externalities. So it's great. I feel backed. So just to say, I mean, carbon pricing, we have jumped. I mean, I'm an ETS director since 7 years. It has been an important policy, but now we are in a first league. We are front of the Green Deal. We are front policy of the Fit for 55. I mean, it's broaden an extension. That's no hesitation. I mean, we are, you know that, and it's an invitation for next panels that we have extended the ETS 1 that covers power, industry, and aviation now to maritime. So maritime means 12,000 ships. We are covering China, Spain, 0.5% of the emissions. Not everybody is aware, so 50% of international coverage of every ship touching European port, flag neutral. So it's a rather impressive one, because maritime was in a kind of limbo, if I could say, and is similar to aviation emissions and also growing. Also the ETS 2 that kicks in 2027, but we have already started to work, because building and transport, another elephant in the room, is there are two sectors, plenty of inertias, difficult, and we will cover. I mean, covering ETS 1 and ETS 2 means more or less that we jump from 43% of the coverage of the economy to around 75% of the coverage of the economy. So 75% of the European economy will be under carbon pricing. Simon, you were mentioning more 23% of the world is covered by carbon pricing, and major one, I have to say, of course, with others, and we work a lot with China, with Brazil, with Vietnam, with Indonesia, but clearly European one is a key one. Just to mention, because today is the summer solstice, so today the forecast is that solar energy will reach 20% of electricity production in Spain, 20%. So let me just drop you something on when you say, will we achieve 2030 targets? Well, ETS 1, for sure. I mean, we were negotiating as lions in the council and in the parliament at night, during day, to get a yearly reduction of 4.4%. This is the current ETS, 4.3, extending 4.4, but simplifying, 4.4% year reduction. Last year we were at 16%, 16. And this is the major, as you know, of the power sector revolution, carbon pricing signal and renewable policies. So it was in the power sector, it was 24% reduction, and wind last year generated more electricity in Europe, European Union, than gas. So are we achieving the targets? Yes, we will be achieving, but it's not for complacence and relaxing, because we have some member states lagging behind in effort sharing targets, also in renewable targets. So it's not homogeneous efforts. ETS 2, so building and transport, I'm very proud of having that. It is a clear business case for decarbonization, but it's not Harry Potter. We will need other policies to push, otherwise we will not make it. We will need charging, right to plug, prosumers policies, energy efficiency policies that I think, in my opinion, we have oversimplified the power of energy efficiency. I think we need to work harder there. But simplifying, we can meet them, but it's not in a relaxing path that we will meet them. If I could just add, is that this new, and I'll link to the keynote before, and just very brief, but we have in a new era of carbon pricing, apart from clearly I'm surrounded by economists, so the market signal is a tool for social cohesion. We have defined, and very proud of that, 88 billion euros will go until 2030 to more vulnerable European citizens, and this can be done in other countries. So nearly 88, the Social Climate Fund, already working on it, kicking in 2026. So this is one leg of carbon pricing. The innovation leg is very important. Carbon pricing risk only take low-hanging fruits. You know very well the lesson. So innovation fund, we need to invest on that, 40 billion dedicated to that. And just so cohesion, innovation, and social aspects are very, very important. And just the last point, international work. I mean, we work and we signed this week, and I'm very happy to be here with Xiliang. We signed this week a memorandum of understanding with China to reinforce cooperation on carbon markets. And we know that other jurisdictions are going to carbon markets or carbon pricing due to CBAM, I mean the carbon border adjustment. So we are in a kind of triggering inspiration of moving other jurisdictions, and I think that that's also a positive part of this mirroring of border adjustment with ETS.
Thanks, Bea. Xiliang, I would like to know your views based on what we heard here from a global perspective, a European perspective. I mean, what's your view from China? I mean, what's the as an architect of the emissions trading system in China, or an inspirer, how do you view the developments? How do you see, also transportation in China? Is such a major actor at the world level that, it's a privilege to have you here to hear your opinions.
Okay, thank you very much for your invitation. So it's really a great pleasure to be here to join this roundtable discussion, and also I'm happy to follow the Beatriz talk, because the EU Commission and Beatriz give a lot of help for China to build the ETS. So I very much appreciate. It also demonstrates the international collaboration. So it's very important to address the climate change, the issues. So I think that I would like to share a couple of my observations of the climate policy development, and also the renewable energy development in China. So I think since the year 2000, China has already adopted a set of policy instruments to promote the low carbon energy economy transformation in China, covering the so-called command and control policy instruments, such as the energy efficiency performance standards, and also the market-based policy instruments, such as the renewable electricity feed-in tariff. I think this policy largely contributing China becoming a leading nation. So in terms of the installation and the manufacturing installation capacity, and also the manufacturing capacity of wind turbines and solar panels, so in the world, and of course the emission trading program. So I think it's a new member of the China's climate policy family, but I think in the future, so it will be play increasing importance role. So for China to really to control the CO2 emission after peaking. So before the year 2030, and to achieve the carbon neutrality before the year 2060. Of course, and so I think so in the year around the year 2009, China has a discussion about what kind of policy instruments will be, climate policy instruments will be introduced. So one is the carbon tax, the second is the emission ETS. So after a discussion, the debates, the government finally make a decision. China would like to China adopted the ETS as a primary carbon pricing policy. And I think since the year 2011, because China is a big nation, so they cannot adopt the policy nationwide immediately. So they implement the 7 pilots, and they launched a pilot program of ETS. So in 5 cities like Beijing, Shanghai, the large cities, and 2 provinces. So so since the year 2011, and so this experience is very important for China, for China's ETS design. So since the year 2012, so I'm leading the design team for the design of the Beijing ETS program. So since year 2015, so now the government started the design and the preparation, so of the national emission trading program. So I'm heavily involved so in the design work. So so in the year 2021, so the China's national emission treaty program started operation with the power generation sector. So that means so far the China national emission treaty program just cover the power generation sector. But the good news is that next year, so the China emission trading program will the coverage, the sector coverage will be extended to the industry sectors such as the iron and steel sector, the cement sector, and the aluminum sector. So I think the program, the national ETS program development program makes a lot of progress, especially for the past 2 years, and a little bit delayed. Beatriz knows a little bit delayed in terms of the coverage extension because the government has spent a lot of energy and efforts to address the data quality issue. So the quality is very important for healthy the carbon market. But I think the coverage, so extension will be speed up, and also right now the allowance allocation is free, but I think next year, so the auctioning so will be introduced for the next compliance period, and so I think this is very important development. And also right now, I think China's ETS, in terms of the carbon price, the peaking of the carbon price for the past year is about 100 yuan, 100 yuan per ton. So it's more than $12. So and I think it's I very much I would like to acknowledge that the EU Commission and Beatriz provide a lot of helps for us for China to build the emission trading program. I very much appreciate. So if there's a possibility, I also would like to say some words about the green, the renewable energy development in China. So as you know, and China, so the last year, the installed capacity so of renewable and nuclear surpassed that of coal power plants. So I think it's a very important development. You know, before China's China's the coal-fired power plants dominate the China's the electricity supply. So last year, so the renewable and the nuclear the capacity surpassed so the coal electricity. Right now, I think approximately 30% of the electricity generated so from the renewables. From the renewable and the nuclear. So I said development and also making China be a leading nation in terms of the installed capacity and the manufacturing capacity of wind turbines and also the solar PV panels. And so I think, of course, so according to my observation, so I think the domestic policy have a big contribution to the development because we have a renewable energy law. So we have introduced the feed-in tariff for the wind electricity and the solar panel. And but I think the international collaboration so it's very, very important because my earlier research is about the renewable policy. And also I involved in the drafting of China's first renewable energy law. So that's 20 years ago. So you see I'm old. That 20 years ago, so China has nothing. So most of wind turbines and the solar panels imported from Europe and other nations. And I still remember at that time, so the generation cost of a solar PV, so it's I think it's 40 US cents per kilowatt hour. So it's 40 US cents per kilowatt hour. But right now, so it's below 2 cents, 2 US cents per kilowatt. It's a big important. But I think, so the international, the domestic policy is important contributor, but the international collaboration, the trading for renewable products and the technology transfer, I think play also a very, very important role. So so the origin of the wind turbine and also the solar panel so it's not China, it's Europe, America. So in this context, technology transfer, I think, play a very important role. So I think the China's contribution largely lies with the technology innovation. So and to reduce the cost, to make the cost of technology be going down, but the technology invention. So the largest contribution belongs to Europe and the US. So I think in this context, I think the international collaboration is very, very important. So I don't support imposing any a tariff and non-tariff barriers to the trade of renewable products and the technology transfer. And I also learned from my colleague, my young friend, Professor Professor Kenneth Xiliang, in his yesterday morning's talk, so it seems that imposing tariff to the solar panel import from China is not good from the United States. Okay. So as an academia, so because from the global energy transition perspective, for the other developing nations, so there's still a big demands for the wind, for the solar, and also for China. So there's a large huge amount of installed capacity needed in China to achieve the carbon neutrality goals. Okay, I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, Zhang, it's your turn now. Can we go now? I mean, we went from the global perspective, big players in the world, and now can we discuss a bit the role of national governments, also your view on the energy transition, because I mean, are we able to, or what's your view on abandoning fossil fuels, as we were mentioning before?
Oh, so that is a key question, right? So thank you for having me. I don't know the answer because the questions are too big, but let me take you through the journey that I've been through recently, which sort of is a good reflection in the debate of energy transition in Europe. So I orchestrated a report from the European Academy of Science, bless you, on the future of gas, right? So I'm a European citizen, I'm a German by nationality, and I live in Norway. So my heart is torn. I was leading this initiative because we wanted to see what are the perspectives from different countries on the role of the future of fossil gas. Immediately you start entering the discussion of hydrogen, you talk CCS, and then you also do talk nuclear, right? So it's a mess basically because you don't have that single answer. What I observed during that process was there was a lot of heterogeneity in terms of problems that European member states are facing within the energy transition. I believe that with the European elections that we just held, I think it can either blow up completely or we will be on the path. I hope we will be on the path on an energy transition, and I'm trying to be positive there. If you look at the development of gas prices over the last 2-3 years in Europe, it has affected different member states, and in particular the population in those member states differently. So the reaction is different. So we have talked to our Hungarian academic partners, and their energy poverty is an issue, which it is not in Norway, right? Or in Germany. So we were discussing, and that goes back to a keynote we had yesterday, what do we actually do to reduce energy poverty, which is also funded on a European level from a social fund, where the money comes from carbon emissions, right? From the prices, depending on the carbon price. So what do we do when we reach net zero? Where do we get money from to support the energy poor affected people? On the other hand, we had a lot of Spanish, Italians, and we are not being recorded, right? And this is Chatham House rules. So they wanted to build pipelines to get more natural gas from North Africa. They wanted to build more LNG import terminals to sort of to keep on producing fossil fuels. And the debate, or the result we had in that report is there will be a role for fossil gas. It will be minor. It will be limited to some sectors. It will not be heating at homes, but the industrial sector will be affected by that. And then there is this really strong push from the Norwegian interest groups, basically trying to keep fossil gas in the system as long as possible. Just some numbers, I'm not as firm as Bea is with her numbers, but this Equinor company, which some of you might still know or remember as Statoil, is managed by politicians of 60% of their shares, right? This company made a profit in 2023 of $23 billion adjusted earnings after tax, right? So because the Russian price was very high, the response in Norway was, no, we should not let the gas price go down to our European exports because, that's just market signals. Let the market do that. And about 10% of that money, or most of the investments actually went to oil and gas exploration. So the Norwegian government is still opening up the Arctic shelf to produce more oil and natural gas. And that's like a little bit schizophrenic within the country. If you think that the emissions of when Equinor's produced oil and gas are burned are equivalent to 5 times of Norway's CO2 emissions, right? So within Norway, it's a lovely place to live. You can go run outside, the air is nice, you have electric vehicles, everything is green, but you don't talk about that. So the final point I would like to make is that there's a lack of knowledge on scope 3 emissions and how to reduce them within the company and within the country, because that's, you know, not happening at home. So I think we are, on an overall perspective, agreeing that there should be a phase out, there should be more investments into renewable energy technologies. Only 1% of Equinor's investments went towards low carbon, CCS and hydrogen technologies. So, you know, companies are still trying to maintain their business model, which I will not blame them for. I think I would probably do the same, but I'm an academic and I don't have to do that. And I think I will leave it here because I donated 2 minutes to my previous speaker.
So let's go for the final talk by Sole. I would like to know your views on the complementarities of the central bank, central banks, or the financial sector with climate policies. What's the role of these approaches?
Okay, I will start with central banks.
Okay, perfect. Too broad. Just you have a few minutes. Yeah.
Okay, I mean, all of us know that the fight against climate change and the transition to a low carbon economy requires the involvement of all economic agents. And it is true that the leading role should be played by governors and legislators, no? That's because they have the democratic legitimacy, and also they have the tools like fiscal policy or economic regulation policy. But central banks have a very important role to play too. And this sentence that I have said, that the leading role should be played by governments, if you read any speech by any central bank in the world, is present there. It's always there. The second part of the sentence, that central banks have a role to play, is also present now. We have improved, because some years ago it was only the first part. And why is that? I mean, why the central banks have a role to play there? Well, because in order to fulfill, in order to achieve their mandates, that's very clear. It was not so clear some years ago, because it's something of the government. We are price stability, and they didn't want to talk anything more about it. No, now it's seen like it affects the mandates, and it affects the mandates because the climate change and the transition has very important economic implications and affects the key variables of any economy, like employment, output, investment, all of them, and uncertainty too, and also because it entails financial risks. And because of these two things, I mean, I could talk about this for the whole keynote speech, but I just have 5 minutes, no? So it entails financial risks, I mean, either or both, physical risks and transition risk that translate, in general, translate to the usual risk faced by a bank, for instance. Credit risk, market risk, operational risk, legislation risk, and so on. So it affects the balances of the banks. And because of that, the banking supervisor has to be involved. I mean, has to make sure that banks manage, first assess these risks, measure them, manage them, include them in their strategy and in their governance too, and disclose them too. And this banking supervisor has to do this. Many times the central bank is also the banking supervisor, or if no, the banking supervisor has to do that. It also, these risks, the financial risk posed by the climate change and the transition, are systemic in nature. And as they are systemic in nature because they affect the whole economy or the whole region that is affected, I could develop this too, but I don't have time. Because of that, it affects financial stability. Usually, banks, central banks, have to surveil the financial stability. They have to assess it, and they have to take measures, macroprudential measures to prevent it, to prevent financial stability problems. So, as physical risks and transition risks are systemic in nature, then and financial stability is in the mandate of central banks. Central bank has to take this into account. It's not an easy task. It's not an easy task because in order to take this into account in the models that they do, for example, stress tests, then they have to construct scenarios with longer horizon than they are used to do. They have to take into account economic effects that they are not used to measure. Economic effects coming from the environmental or the loss of biodiversity and things like that it's very difficult to model, but they have to do so because it's in their mandate. And the economic effects and the financial risk posed by the climate change and the transition also affects monetary policy because central banks first accepted that it will affect financial stability and banks and financial institutions. And they were a little later when they accepted that it also affects monetary policy. And it affects monetary policy because it affects price levels, volatility of inflation also, the natural interest rate. So the natural interest rates, the distance from the rate you have and the natural interest rate is the stance of the monetary policy. So it affects it also, and also the transmission of the monetary policy, because as far as the financial risk, for instance, materialize, then credit could be impeded, and then the transmission of the monetary policy could be affected also. Besides that, central banks have a portfolio. And then this financial risk affect also their portfolio. So they have to take into account that too. Right? They have a portfolio of many kinds. Usually it's divided between monetary policy portfolio and non-monetary policy portfolio. And then in monetary policy portfolio, some of it comes from the collateral pledged by banks when they ask for money to the central bank. And also, so another reason to get involved. And also, they produce banknotes. And banknotes production can be very, very high carbon footprint. So it's also involved there, and not only the production, but also transportation and also distraction. The distraction is the most, distraction of banknotes. So also they have to get involved with that. And at the end also they have in their mandate, most of the banks, they don't have only the price stability mandate. They also have, for instance, the ECB has also to support government policies. In the case of the ECB, is to support European Union policies. So they have to support the policies to make the transition. And in the case of a central bank, it translates to enhance green finance, because without the involvement of without funding, we don't have transition. And without the involvement of the financial sector, we won't have transition.
Well, thank you very much. I think I give now the micro to the floor. I could do a summary, but we have about half an hour. So happy to take questions from the audience to any of the panelists, or reflections, or whatever. Yeah, Matthew.
Yeah, thank you for the intervention. So just one keyword, adaptation to climate change, because some of you are quite pessimistic, and one reason for being more optimistic is adaptation. So what do you think about that?
Whoever. Bea? Yeah, very happy to.
What I think about adaptation will be too broad, but just give you another number to make Anne pleasure. 1%. If the cost of adaptation, if we don't accelerate our mitigation policies, is estimated at 1% of European GDP in 2030. And I'm talking about the European Union, not Bangladesh or Vanuatu or Marshall Islands. So clearly we need to put a climate risk as part of our portfolio, banks, policies, governance, and we need to reinforce the adaptation to climate change. There is, I think, our last paper from the, let me do some publicity of European Union policy. It puts on the table the stronger need for a proper governance. It puts on the table what are the risks. It puts on the table also the co-benefits, because we are talking about biodiversity, soil, health, and many other aspects that need to quantify. And I think that there's not anymore this adaptation against mitigation. Is clearly we need both, and an adaptation and proper risk assessment needs to be a part of our policies. Just also the insurance companies are more and more worried, and rightly. So we need also to have a proper risk. I think that the numbers on how many Europeans, and sorry I talk about Europe because it's the one I know more, but the numbers, I think it's 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 4 Europeans live in flood-prone areas. So yes, I mean you have, it's a very good question, more complex answer, but clearly a top priority.
Any extra reflections from the panel? Well, then we go to...
Thank you, Xavier. I have a million questions, but I guess I'm only allowed to ask one. I'm very interested in this idea of we need to translate all these risks and everything into financial indicators, financial economics, and that the central banks definitely have a very big role to play. But I wanted to ask a question about the whole process, all the UNFCCC process, because for me another elephant in the room is what if Trump wins the elections? We had something similar in the past, and I wonder what are your thoughts about this, because I mean this is something that worries me in terms of the UNFCCC process, let's say.
Anyone takes this?
Well, as regards central banks, I mean, you are a little right. I think central banks are very slow. I mean, I don't talk now as a central bank. Central banks are always very, very slow. And then it took a while for them to be aware of this, of these issues. I think once it's there, it will be there. and they are doing things. I mean, the ECB is doing many things in this respect. But it's also true that the intensity of the doing depends on the person who is running it. I mean, and for instance, I think that in the case of the Bank of England, they were more active with the previous governor that they are now, although they are still very active. In the case of the US, they were not active at all before, and now they are, I mean, with the, for instance, in the case of the US, one of the major catalysts of the awareness of the central bank's involvement in these issues has been the network for greening the financial system, which is a network created by 8 central banks, and now there is 138 of them. And the US didn't come to it. It was created in 2017, and the US didn't belong to it until 2020. So it took a while for them. And they are still, I mean, if you compare the Fed with ECB or the Bank of England or Bank of China, they lag much behind. They are arriving there, but they are still, and I think it depends. I mean, in general, it won't disappear, the role played by the central banks, but the intensity depends on the person. And I think that in terms of the policy, politicians is even more, no?
Anyone takes the Trump, perhaps you, Lucas?
Yeah, I'll make it a bit more general. I mean, we are all worried about the elections, not only in the US, but also in France, for example. So many things come up which could be unpleasant and which could delay. But I learned that, there's 3 things. It's policy, technology, and behavior. And this is kind of a process which is long run now, and it has there is some momentum to this process. So if you have a change of government in one country, even if it's a big country, maybe the impact is not that big. I mean, there is an impact for sure. But I also saw the impact from policy on technology. This is endogenous actually. So technologies are induced. For me, it's no wonder that the electric car came out of California, because there was a long-standing policy to promote this. And these things, they are on the way, they come on. And the relative prices work, and they work in favor of renewables, and this is something which will not go away. And some countries have changed governments, and they had made a huge noise, and in the end they did not do much. So I think about Italy, if you are not recording. So, I mean, it's not pleasant to have these governments, but probably the avalanche is going. This would be my hope. And then later on probably we will change again, or we will have a favorable outcome of the elections. But I mean, these things, yeah, we cannot exchange the voters, we cannot exchange these political conditions. We have to live with them. We don't have a plan B actually, we have to go fully into decarbonization. And what I would think is if the political support is weakening, then it gets a delay. But I think in the end, the tendency and the direction is actually correct, so this will go on.
Thank you, and thank you to all the panelists. My question is, you mentioned fossil fuels, but I was wondering about more generally predatory delay by the private sector, some parts of the private sector, so heat pumps in the UK, the hydrogen lobby pushing hard for investment in maybe beyond what would be reasonable. What do you find governments need as from, say, us academics as information and data to go against that sort of bad or lobbying that is based on wrong foundations?
No, I'm on the academic side here as well, and I would like to hear the answers from Bea, maybe.
Well, I don't know if it's lobbies. Welcome to the world, right? Lobbies are all over, and I think that we do a Green Deal or a transformation of the economy as a walk in the park. It's not a critic, it's just a reflection. So to do its economic transformation or societal transformation, as I walk in the park, let's forget about that. Good thing on the lobbies is that if I compare, let me be a little bit a nanny. I mean, I was in solar energy working long time ago. I started on that. Did the first solar plant in Europe, second in the world. I was very famous, and it was a miserable 1 megawatt. So now make us laugh, but at that time it didn't laugh. It was like, wow, super important. So there is a difference now. You have also a renewable lobby, a renewable push. You have also some industries that they are forward-looking. I mean, that they know that, oops, they could be a strategic. I heard the depressing numbers on Equinor, but thanks God it's true that there are others that they say, okay, what is our positioning? What is our strategy? But you're right. I mean, what can I say? The lobbies are very strong, but we have also democracies and society. We work also with consumers associations, and consumers association or prosumers that they have their rights. And as I said, I mean, and I don't want to make any publicity, but there are big differences in utilities if you compare Iberdrola with others' portfolio. Of course, so the lobbies are extending also in the good sign, and yeah, welcome to policy making, and I think that policy makers are paid for also resisting lobbies and take a consumers and a citizen approach. But you're right, tough world.
Hello, I'm feeling quite pessimistic, I suppose. You know, I don't know if you saw the numbers that came out yesterday for the global greenhouse gas emissions. They were produced by the Energy Institute, saying that they've increased again last year. So people were hoping that maybe the year before was the peak. So they've increased again. In Europe, I think in the recent elections in many countries, the Green parties took, you know, a very big hit, which would, I think that although consumers or people in general are aware of climate change, the implementation of climate policies, at least in Europe, seems to be very difficult. I'm not sure about China, but so I just wonder, has there been too much emphasis maybe on consumers? And most of us spend our working lives analysing policy instruments, particularly at the household level, which works, what doesn't work. And I wonder, should we be focusing much more of our efforts upstream on Equinor, but also just industry in general? On the other hand, as soon as we do that, there's a lot of worry about carbon leakage. Agriculture is up in arms in Europe. I just wonder, is there, you know, what should we do? We need to change tack, I think, completely, it seems, or maybe it's just a wave and it'll go away again and then we'll be back on track. I do think these things in terms of popular culture seem to come up and down a little bit, and I feel at the moment we're down, at least in Europe. So I just wonder, do you have any other insights there on whether we should move upstream our focus while people are so against implementation of policies?
Simon, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, just to add, I think a bit of context on this, which I think has been known in the climate negotiations. And in fact, my boss, who was the chief EU and UK negotiator back then, I came as a climate economist into the negotiation team, and the very first thing he said to me is we need many, many more climate economists in general, but we especially need finance ministries to be focusing on this. So I think one of the, this is not a direct answer to your question, but I think one of the major bottlenecks that we've seen when it comes to implementing these policies is that it's usually the purview of the Environment Ministry in terms of emissions controls, whereas actually it's the Finance Ministry that's in charge of the most important levers that we have for macro change, which is of course taxing and spending, the $17 trillion that governments spend each year and raise through taxing certain products and not taxing other products. And when we talk to finance ministries, and we do regularly as the IMF, both developed and developing countries, and increasingly through the rubric of things like the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action, which now has 90 member countries covering a majority of GDP. And we ask them, you know, why aren't you doing these things? Why aren't you doing carbon taxes and fossil fuel subsidies? And yes, the political economy stuff does come up, but often a lot of things that come up are data gaps, knowledge gaps, skill gaps. And so that's why we need a lot more data, a lot more models that are easy to use, for policymakers, i.e. simple and quick and able to give insights on trade-offs between different objectives that governments have, whether it's revenues and GDP and distributional impacts and poverty and energy access and co-benefits and all these sorts of things. That's something we're focusing on a lot with our toolkit, which we're actually giving increasingly to governments. But there's definitely a role, I think, for everybody in this room to accelerate the narrowing of those knowledge gaps, specifically in finance ministries. But the politics of this just seem to sort of come and go in waves, and I don't want to comment too much on that because it's anyone's guess what's going to happen in the near future.
Any further comment? Yeah, please.
May I add very quickly, to make you a little bit optimistic, we have now more than 40% of electricity from renewables in Europe. This was not unthinkable so fast some years ago. But I think on the narrative, I think that you are right. We need to change a little bit the narrative and go more to positive agenda than to burden. Just a drop on agriculture. We have in agriculture shouting in Brussels quite frequently. And you don't hear very frequently, that is 1/3 of the European budget, and you don't hear very frequently neither that European agriculture has a positive trade balance of 50 billion euro per year.
I can take one or two more questions if there is any.
Can I just follow up on that? So also be a little bit more positive. And I'm not a climate economist, and I'm not an environmental economist. I think as an economist, we should just let the prices and the quantities flow. I think, and without losing touch to the people. I think that's what we are doing. We are not talking to people anymore. We are in our bubbles, and we are in Atocha, and it's lovely. But we are not talking to the fishermen outside, right? And I think that will be key to sort of, on a very different perspective, to get the people back on board. That's my pledge, actually.
Well, actually, we had a dinner on Wednesday, and the guy in the restaurant asked me, what are you doing in this conference? I said, we are economists working on climate mitigation and climate energy. And I said, are we as fucked as we think? And what can I answer back? Well, anyway, so yeah, I agree with you on the bubble and on the need to transmit and to receive feedback. Okay, I think we are entering a Spanish time lunch, which is not good for non-Spanish. We already entered that time, so apologies for this. We have a very tight schedule, so let me finish this session thanking all the participants. I think they were great. And I would say I leave this session less pessimistic than when I entered, because the messages were not as bad. Except your last question, Lisa. But the messages were, well, at the global level, we don't have the first best. We may not even have the second best, third best, but we have the best we can have, and perhaps it can work. At European level, we received very, very good feedback from the responsible of these matters. An optimistic view, and will comply with the objectives. Also, the view from the IMF was not bad. China is doing well as well. We can expect some progress in innovation that can help us. But of course, and the banks are taking this into account, and also Anne gave us some good news. I think we have plenty of work to do still, and well, that's our task for the future. And now let's go lunch, and perhaps we can continue talking to this high-level panel. Thank you very much, Lord.